Morning, everyone. How's the sound levels? I don't hear much coming out of it. So this morning, I'd like to speak a little bit on the energy and how to work with the energy of emotion. And I'll be using a little bit of material from Trungpa Rinpoche's book, the Myth of Freedom and the Way of Meditation. I don't know if most of you out there have read this, but this was one of his early books in the early 70s, and still, I think, one of the best in a lot of ways. In fact, a lot of the best materials seem to be done in the 60s and 70s, kind of like rock music too, right, Mike? Some would argue with that, but so there are many ways that we can work with emotion. This weekend we have this Zen Dialogue facilitator training going on, and we're working with it in a particular way through that method. But what I'd like to look at today is how we work with actually the energetics of the process of emotion. So we have this unique perspective as human beings. We have access to this spacious quality of mind. We can call it Buddha mind or whatever term you want to use for it. And yet we still have to wash the dishes and take a shower, keep ourselves clean, go to work. And if we're lay people, we have to figure out a way to make money, which isn't always easy. And basically live, pretty much the same life that everyone else around us is living. But it doesn't mean that we're relating in the same way to what's happening around us as somebody that doesn't understand, doesn't come to the understanding in the same way that we do through our practice here. So in 1970, I started doing yoga from books. There were no teachers or schools around where I grew up in that time. Now there's one on every street corner. There's a yoga studio. There's more yoga teachers and Zen teachers now than there are probably Catholic priests in the country, I would guess. But back then it was just the opposite. And so I was reading from books, and the books, they talked about meditating. And so I started meditating. And it was interesting. The other day during one of our Wednesday sittings, I, for the first time in many years, went back to the first meditation that I ever did in this lifetime, which was when I was 17 years old. And I remember quite clearly that that very first sitting, I had an experience of the expansive, spacious quality of mind. And I went, oh. I've been reading all this stuff in these books about it, and all of a sudden I had an awakening to that. I actually experienced it, and that changed everything for me at that point. And I'm still doing the same thing today. I was doing the same thing last Wednesday, or I think it was the Wednesday before last, when I tuned into that, what happened so many years ago. Still sitting with basically the same Al, just an older body, that's all. However, a lot's changed in terms of my perspective of who I am, what I'm doing on the planet, and in this case, how I work with emotion. So there's a bit of a disconnect, I think, in Zen between the experience of the awakened mind and emotion, which is a product of being a human being, essentially. And there's not a lot of talk in traditional Zen writing about the power of emotion and how it can derail us or help us, as the case may be. That's because of the nature of the practice as defined in traditional Zen, is dealing much more with this process of how we awaken to the state of Buddhahood And in a monastic setting, where people were removed from the everyday stuff that we deal with in a certain way, and yet they had emotions. I'm sure there was jealousy and anger and all that kind of stuff that arose. In fact, there's evidence of it in some of the stories, but there isn't any talk about how to work with it. So one of the things that always appealed to me about Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings, being what I would call a modern Tibetan Buddhist teacher, is that he really got into that. He really got into, in what's called the Vajrayana school, how they work with these various aspects of being human, which isn't really talked about much in Zen. Now, wasn't really. I mean, in current times, there's a lot of psychotherapists and teachers, and there's a lot more speaking about this in Zen now. I think it's actually a wonderful addition to Zen, that in modern times we do deal with this. But I still go back to what Trungpa Rinpoche talks about because it's so clear. And so no matter how much that we experience the undifferentiated spacious quality of mind, it doesn't necessarily mean that we've then worked on that, the human part of us, that where emotion is arising, sometimes in response to times when we're highly triggered, or even just in the course of an average day. What do we do as Zen practitioners when we feel overcome by emotion, when we feel overcome by sadness or anger or frustration or whatever the particular feeling or emotion is? And in the Zen dialogue method, we have a particular way of working with it, but I'm not going to actually talk about that way today because I've done that a lot in the past. This is a little different way of working with it. Actually quite different, which is also very effective in certain respects. And that has to do with becoming one with the energy of it, of an emotion. So all of this, Trungpa Rinpoche talks about this in this chapter. I'm not going to read all of it because it's pretty extensive. He talks about how the experience for a Zen practitioner, any Buddhist practitioner, he's talking about Tibetan Buddhism here specifically, but he's talking about how all of this has to be, we have to become aware of it in that spacious context. So in order to get a perspective on emotion, we first, it's kind of fundamental, have to experience and kind of get ourselves established in, and there's a difference between those two. Experience of and getting established in is a very different step. Being established in the spacious quality of mind requires a lot of practice over a long period of time. Just experiencing it is still an awakening, but it doesn't mean it's really become like a part of who we are. And until it becomes a real part of who we are, what I'm talking about here is kind of impossible to do because we just don't have the energy of clarity enough to see to be mindful enough of what's going on. But as we practice and we do get that kind of clarity, and it takes varying amounts of time for different people, then working with emotion can be done in a very different way. So classically speaking, what the average human does, including myself, in the past, is either suppressing emotion or expressing emotion. Those are kind of the two polarities. So expressing emotion you see every day, people flipping each other off, cutting in front of each other in traffic and getting angry at each other. It's like it's becoming normal in politics to be angry at everything all the time and aggrieved all the time about this and that and the other thing. It's just an expression of emotion. It's not that I'm saying that's good or bad, but the problem with expressing emotion, it's often fine to express it, but if it's done to excess, then it can get very dangerous. And we see things escalating through emotional encounters with two or more people, where something very simple and practical becomes a reason to take out a gun and kill somebody, maybe, or to injure somebody else or whatever. So things can escalate with emotion, obviously. So degree is very important. But what we're talking about here in this particular methodology is not kind of excessive triggering as much as just the average experience that can be quite disturbing to us at different times, not the getting out of hand road rage type emotion. So expression is one way. Virtually everyone, I would say probably everyone, at least at some point in their life, has suppressed emotion. And there's many, many reasons why we suppress emotion. Probably as many as there are people on the planet, if not many more than that. You probably all know, if you've been practicing for a while, some of the reasons why you may have suppressed emotion. Perhaps when you were a child, you were told it wasn't okay to express it in a healthy way, or you just felt through the actions of parents or other authority figures, or maybe siblings or even friends, that it wasn't cool to act emotional. If you look at the myths of the Western, of the Old West, which kind of was very prominent in our culture when I was growing up, both the cowboys and the Indians were very unemotional. It wasn't cool for an Indian to be emotional. I think that often that was kind of the way they did things as warriors. And then the cowboys were the same way. You didn't see a cowboy usually crying, for instance. I'm sure many of them did, but that's not what they showed in the mythical literature and the mythical movies and TV shows and whatever. There was always this taciturn, not unemotional person, and that was the person who got things done on their own, usually, sometimes with the help of a few other sidekicks. But it was mainly one person, usually a man. I'm surprised to all the women here that it was patriarchal at the time. But those of us who practice with this, we begin to recognize what some of the downside of suppression of emotion is. There's tremendous danger in holding emotion in, equal in an internal level to the danger of overexpressing it outwardly, which with others that then activates them, and then there becomes the acceleration of emotion against emotion, ego against ego. And that is that we create ill internal psychological and physical health when we've held things in, because it requires a tremendous amount of energy to hold things in, and then we become unconscious of the ways in which we're holding it in. And it becomes so unconscious that we just don't even realize it's going on, and we wonder why we're exhausted all the time. And we'll be in situations that are emotional for some reason or another, and then we come out of it highly exhausted. Usually that's not because we're healthily expressing it as much as we're holding in and we're not expressing, and it takes quite a bit of energy to hold the lid down on the boiling pot. The steam naturally just wants to arise and come out. So I want to just read from this now, because I think it's an excellent way that he describes the next stage. This is from The Myth of Freedom, and the chapter is called The Dualistic Barrier, which is quite appropriate. We are speaking here of becoming one with the emotions. This is different from and in contrast to the usual approach of suppressing them or acting them out. If we are suppressing our emotions, it is extremely dangerous because we're regarding them as something terrible, shameful. We are regarding them as something terrible. I'm sorry, shameful. I read that twice, which means that our relationship to our emotions is not really open. Once we try to suppress them, sooner or later, they're going to step out and explode. There's another possibility. If you do not suppress your emotions, then you really allow yourself to come out and be carried away by them. This way of dealing with the emotions also comes from a kind of panic. Your relationship with your emotions has not been properly reconciled. This is another way of escaping from the actual emotion. It's kind of an interesting way to look at it, right? I'll read that again. This is another way of escaping from the actual emotion, another kind of release, but it's a false release. It is a confusion of mind and matter, thinking that the physical act of practicing emotions, of putting them into effect, supposedly will cure the emotion, relieve their irritation. But generally, it simply reinforces them. And the emotions become more powerful. The relationship between the emotion and mind is not quite clear here, so still a lack of clarity. So the intelligent way of working with emotions is to try to relate with their basic substance, the abstract quality of the emotions, so to speak. The basic isness quality of the emotions, the fundamental nature of the emotion is just energy. And if one is able to relate with energy, then the energies have no conflict with you. They become a natural process. So trying to suppress or getting carried away by the emotions becomes irrelevant once a person is completely able to see their basic characteristic, the emotions as they are, which is essentially shunyata, or emptiness or spacious quality. The barrier, the wall between you and your projections, the hysterical and paranoid aspects of your relationship to your projections, has been removed. Well, not exactly removed, but seen through. When there is no panic involved in dealing with the emotions, then you can deal with them completely and properly. Then you are like someone who is completely skilled in his profession, who does not panic, but just does the work completely and thoroughly. Sounds easy, right? But is it? Yeah, it is actually. It's quite easy. It's quite simple, but that doesn't mean that it's easy for us to do it. You know, it always amazes me when you see someone who's really great at something, who's a real master of anything that we do. It can be painting, it can be motorcycle riding, it can be, you know, speaking, it can be, I don't know, any activity. There are people who have practiced it a lot, and you watch them do it. And you go, I could do that. You know, there's this movie about Jackson Pollock. He was this artist that threw paint against the canvas. I can do that. I can throw paint against the canvas, but actually I couldn't, because the way he was not doing it just randomly. It was coming out of his many years of working with painting, and so it was not the same as if someone just threw it at the wall. Um, it, Improvising in jazz is not the same as just playing any note randomly, although to someone who's untrained in it, it might sound like it, but it's not. It's based on studying scales for many, many years, and also having the ear to hear what you're playing against. And then it functions naturally. So there's a naturalness to it. It looks really easy. And you try and do it, you go, oh my God, it's so easy. So this is easy for someone who's been doing it and practicing it for a long time, and who isn't highly activated. Because even people who are well practiced can be surprised. And this is where we have to be mindful. So all of these kinds of ways of working with things like emotion require mindfulness. Everything requires mindfulness. Whether we're a plumber, electrician, a Zen practitioner, no matter what it is, mindfulness is a necessary component to doing anything well and carefully. We don't want an unmindful, I'm going to be having cataract surgery next month. I don't want an unmindful cataract surgeon. I want him to really be mindful when my eyes are under that knife or laser. Okay. And if he wasn't, he couldn't have done thousands of them. He would have been arrested or something, probably, or certainly not still be an eye surgeon. So have to bring that kind of, it's someone's eye. And interestingly enough, that expression of treat mindfulness like you're handling your own eyeballs. I remember reading that in a Zen text once. Like, imagine it's your own eyes. How important are your eyeballs to you? They're really important. And so that is how carefully we have to be mindful of things like this. Why? Because it's destructive otherwise. The destructive energy of overexpression and the destructive energy of suppression, both in their different ways, have injurious effects and create suffering for ourselves and others. And as practitioners of this path, our object is not to create suffering if we can. There are times it's going to happen anyway, and it can't be avoided. And then that's why we have atonement chants and rituals and other things like that. But for the most part, our object is to alleviate suffering wherever we can. We can't always do it, but in this case, if we're mindful enough, we can. So what is the energy of emotion? There's always energy to every emotion. And let's look at anger, for instance. So anger is often described as being being like heat. Some people experience it as heat or as red. You know, in cartoons, when the bull in the ring, the bullfighter's fighting, gets angry, they show red. You know, like there's something about red that maybe because the Roman god of war was red, Mars. You know. So there's that heat, there's that energy, but it's energy, and that energy starts somewhere. You know, it starts within the body, but it's also happening within this spacious consciousness, and then it rises. It seems to arise. And so, can we recognize the arising, which is the energetic aspect of it, before it becomes a full-blown anger response? Once it becomes anger, then we need to work with the anger as best we can. And that's different. It's a different process. But I'm talking about something that requires more mindfulness, so we can start to feel, oh, that's starting to arise. We feel it and we drop. We drop it because it's something we create. We create it, we add to it. There's the energy. The energy arises from some trigger, some ancient trigger within us. And then immediately it becomes something that can quickly get out of control and cause injury to ourselves and others. But if we can catch it, if we can start to feel it arising, then we can drop it. We can just feel the energy. Not just energy. Energy is just energy, like he says here. There's actually no value. There's no particular good or bad that can be put on energy. It just is. It's part of the life force that animates our bodies. You know, what's the difference between a live body and a dead body? There's energy. There's energy to it when it's alive. As soon as it dies, the energy is not there. The body can still be there, same body, slightly changed, but pretty much the same immediately after death, but the energy's gone. The life force is gone. So this is part of the life force, the arising of the life force that we're working with. So anger is just part of the life force in that. Any of the emotions that arise are just part of that life force. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't express healthily express emotion that arises. There are many instances where there's no reason to suppress that. There's no reason even particularly to even let it go. But so much of emotion is destructive, and so much of it is coming from this dualistic standpoint, this me versus them standpoint. So this is working with the energy of the situation is a very powerful way to release the negative effects, the physiological negative effects too, because there are many physiological effects to excessive emotion. So maybe we'll just open it up now and see what people feel about this issue.
All right, if you're online, just go ahead and unmute yourself because I won't be able to see you wave. Oh, 1 second.
Thank you, Roshi, for this talk. As a therapist and as a human being who has learned through Zen to be fully in whatever is happening with me at the moment and to not ignore it and to sit with it and figure out the ingredients of it. Has been life-changing for me. But the reality is, just like you're saying, there's so many books on this, the body keeps score, and often what happens is, especially if something is highly emotional, whenever we experience that state, whatever that emotion was at the moment, oftentimes after that moment is gone, when people think of that incident, that energy that you're talking about that they experienced at that moment is now back again, that same energy.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because it wasn't processed, like you said. So, and it's such a valuable lesson for everyone and something that I think you put into words so beautifully. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, that creates what's called the wheel of, or the circle of causation, or karma, right? That we're triggered, and then we go into the response, and then we're triggered, going to the response, triggered, going to the response, and it can be often an escalating trigger response. After a while, it starts spinning, and then we feel like we're, quote, out of control, unquote, which means we've ceded control to the energy of the emotion. Essentially, we've ceded control, which then puts us in a situation of reacting out of that emotion instead of out of clarity, which can very rapidly escalate dangerous situations externally, and then internally, of course. It has a very disruptive effect on our whole body too. Yeah. And Diane. So Diana, that's here, by the way. There's one online maybe too. I don't know. I can't see everyone who's online today. Yeah.
I wanted to say that I really appreciated the words, it's just energy. There is no value to it. Because sometimes I feel that we kind of like put a lot of judgment, right, to that energy and believe something has to be done or yeah, something needs to result from this energy. But what if we just see it as pure energy? Then all we have to do is experience it. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that situations where people aren't able to do this, that we don't work with the situation as it is. Obviously, you're a therapist, and Wendy's a therapist too. So I'm sure you do this all the time. And you can't always say to you can't present this way of working with emotion to someone who's highly emotional, that has never done any self-reflection. They're not ready for that yet. And so you meet them where they are. You work with them where they are. But ultimately, for a practitioner, this gives us a certain kind of freedom to express emotion in a healthy way when we need to, but not to escalate, and working with the essential energy, which is the essential energy of anything, is the most basic state of it, whether it's emotion, pain, just our life force, that kind of gut level experience of what it means to be alive. All that is essentially energy. It can be experienced and worked with in a really creative way, then, in a way in which we're not causing more suffering so much.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something quickly about this subject. I recently had an interchange with someone where I was very angry. And as you've been talking, Rochelle, I really was thinking about, catching that moment where you turn it around. And there's this intimate familiarity with my habitual response that I don't necessarily dislike. It just reinforces, oh yeah, it's this way. He's just, just all those thoughts, beliefs, it just lines them up and that's how I do it. So it's that moment when you catch it. That's the trick, the mindfulness, to actually not just have that emotion and then all this, the steamroller of stuff that comes, my usual way of doing it. So I don't know, you just kind of reminded me of the importance of that, catching it.
Yeah,
And how do we do that?
well, practice. It's like getting to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice a lot. It's the Carnegie Hall of being a human is practicing about that, practicing with that. And, it's not something you just get to and then don't have to practice more. I mean, it's an ongoing practice, I think, lifelong, but you get a lot better at it. But I liked what you said about, and it's an interesting way to put it. I'm intimate with my habitual responses, and we're intimate with our habits. We're intimate also with the destructive habits and the habits that create suffering. That's why this practice is lifelong, because these things are so deeply rooted. They're so deeply rooted. And we have to be very careful of thinking we've gotten to a place where we don't have to work with this anymore. In my experience, we never know what might come along, a really dangerous situation or a situation that's really out of the ordinary for us in some form or another. And all of a sudden we're just back there again. We're just back in that red hot anger and the destructive anger. So yeah, so we need to become intimate with a different part of ourselves, I think, to become mindful in the way that you just were alluding to. We have to become intimate with that basic wisdom of the spaciousness, but also the wisdom of the energy of it. So they talk a lot in Tibetan Tantra, and the word Tantra simply means transformation. So we're transforming the energy of anger from a destructive force into a creative wisdom force. And we do that through realizing the energetic aspect of it and then being able to work with the energetic aspect. That transforms it from something that's dangerous and destructive to something that can enliven us, actually. So the wisdom of that can enliven us. We have to become intimate with that instead of the habitual destructive parts, which don't serve us or anyone else around us well.
Roshi?
Yeah. Hi, Andy.
Thanks for the talk. Yeah, fantastic thing to be reminded of over and over and over again. And what came to mind was, it's simple, but it takes a lot of practice to be able to have the kind of mindfulness where, we're constantly recognizing that the energy when it comes up. And in the past, at least down in Naples, we've periodically done like an ongo, a practice period on the 4 establishments of mindfulness. For a concerted period of time, we can pay attention to the body and the body, right, and the feelings and the 4 things that the Buddha taught that in terms of how to develop that kind of mindfulness. And I'd put a plug in for doing that again sometime because it seems to me to be one of those fundamental practices to develop that none of us can ever do too much of. Because as you were saying, I mean, I'm just reflecting back on, politics. When you're in the moment and you're all in there and the energy comes up of, anger, resentment, whatever it is, it takes a lot of practice to be able to have that space to say, wow, I'm really pissed off.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to let that energy pass.
Yeah, and we can do it in all kinds of different. You can be reading something on Facebook that really pisses you off and noticing it. You can be engaged in a conversation and notice it. You can be listening to some video or TV and notice it. There's so many places where it arises, where our habitual responses arise. The habitual responses are the go-to until we've become, again, using that word intimate, we become intimate with a different way of approaching the whole process. And then we become more and more and more close to that as time goes on. And it doesn't mean, like I say, that something doesn't break through it every now and then, but even if something breaks it, then we breaks through it, then we come back and we apologize if we need to, or work with it if we need to, and then go back to that mindful observing of that again. I can think of something like that happened with me a couple of years ago, where I got really angry at something someone was saying. I felt I was justified, but afterwards we both kind of apologized to each other. And so that's about the best way to work with it. If something does break through, is you then admit that it's broken through and then apologize. Apology goes along with true apology, not just fake apology, which you hear people making all the time. People know when you're really apologizing or you're faking it. It's pretty obvious.
Me again, Roshi.
That's all right.
What you're talking about makes me think of, also having compassion for ourselves, because, like in particular, I was telling Diana last night about years ago, I got stopped in Cocoa Beach by this police officer. And I think everyone knows I'm prior law enforcement. Well, I always had a rule that, I never liked traffic, never liked doing traffic, but I always had a rule that if I stop you, I will either give you a ticket or a lecture, but I will not do both. Well, he stopped me and he handed me one ticket. And then he told me he was doing me a favor and handed me 2 more tickets.
Was that after you talked back to him or not?
No,
Oh, okay.
I was completely polite up until that
Oh,
point.
okay.
When he told me he was doing me a favor, and he really wasn't. But for years, I felt guilty about that interaction because I really showed my ugly side. My angry side. How dare you, but very recently, and this was years and years ago, and all that time, I felt guilty about it until recently, where I re-examined it and I said, you know what was going on in my life at that time? And then I realized, I lift my perspective up and I kind of look down on the situation and I say, God, girl, you were going through hell. You were raw. And then all it took was somebody to light that flame.
Yeah, the button was pushed.
Yeah, but so as a reminder to have compassion for ourselves, because we are human.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so.
And
Okay.
last time I checked, I was. Last disease I got, which was fairly recently, made me realize it again. Yeah, that's a good point. And what you're expressing there is how long that can affect you, how long, because whatever you did at the time, you weren't effectively working with the energy of how you felt afterwards until a certain point when you were, and then you could drop it. And this is all part of the process. So we work with wherever we are with it. And if it's stuff from the past, because if you meditate for long enough and you do the work that we do, all of us here do for long enough, everything will come up from your past. Every time you ever were angry and did something stupid, or you didn't stand up for yourself, or you created suffering for one person or for yourself or for a group, and it'll all arise. And it's, or even in my case, the collective, I felt that a lot of what came up for me in my meditation in past years, and occasionally still does, is kind of the collective pain and anger of people that I'm related to, either by religion or ethnicity or family or whatever. There's all kinds of ways that collective anger can express itself, and we take it on. We take it on, and then we often don't work with it effectively. But if you meditate for long enough, or you do the kind of work we do, like the dialogue work or breath work or whatever, or psychotherapy, you will encounter it all eventually, because it all has to be examined. Better to examine and work with it all now, then you won't have to go through that when you die. People always talking about they're near death and they went through everything. Well, go through it beforehand, and then won't be so bad. Maybe. Anybody else? I think we can take one more if anyone.
Got one back for us.
Okay. Someone I don't even see. Oh, Lynn's back there. Lynn's always back there these days.
Hi, this is Lynn. What a great lesson. Thank you so much. I just want to say, I just from my own self, I know the value of looking at the stuff that triggers you. And getting to the bottom of it, not sloughing it aside. And it's interesting, Angie's lesson on Thursday touched on this too. And it's a really powerful thing. Because I've, I'm pretty old, so I've, and kind of early back, I decided that looking at things and getting them sorted out is really a good idea. And not to say that I've taken care of everything, mind you, but I don't have a lot of baggage in the attic anymore. If I'm angry today, it's about something that's happened today, usually, not something that is hooked up to something way back where. And it's a much better place than to work with whatever comes up, because it's cleaner. It's not so complicated. And I just feel like my practice is to just keep clearing the decks. And, not too long ago, I got pissed off at something. And I had a few words with a neighbor, and but you can clean it up, and you keep cleaning it up until it's cleaned up. If you have to do it more than once, you do it more than once.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's also helpful to just learn some, in human psychological I don't know, processes for, if I'm angry and it's something that needs to be said, how can I say that in a skillful way? How can I have that communication, or the sadness or whatever it is that comes up? It's really important. And if we need to get training in that kind of thing, well, there's lots of things we can do to learn those. The good thing about habits is you can unlearn them and you can learn good ones. So I just feel like my practice keeps helping me be a clearer vessel, because when I'm in that space where you're in your human body and you're living your human life, but we're also cognizant of the bigger picture at the same time, then it's just energy flowing through a clear vessel. And if I've got those things cleared out, I just know that my life works better, and it works better for everybody around me. Well, anyway, thank you for that. Really excellent lesson. And for everybody that's.
Yeah, I like that term, cleaning up. It's like when you walk your dog, clean up after it. When you walk your anger around, clean it up. If it poops somewhere, clean it up.
That's the image I'm gonna take away from.
There you go. Yeah, maybe we should just end with that, unless we have another person. Do we have anyone else online? Okay, all right, thank you, everyone. I just want to mention that Lynn was talking about Thursday night. So there's 4 of us, myself, Andy, Robert, and Angie, who do a Thursday night class at 7 p.m. It's open to any OMZ members, so you're always welcome to tune into that. We have a rotating schedule. So. All right, thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.